Today we're gonna make our own textures using just our phone to take pictures from around the house. Coming off the tripod. Let's start in the office. I've got this chair that I like the fabric on. I'm just trying to find textures and surfaces that might be useful in future designs. Ideally you want like as even lighting as possible, so you can see like the shadows kind of coming up in this image. I might tilt a different way just to see if I can get a slightly more even shot. And it's kind of cool because the light will create some like interesting gradients, which might loan themselves to good textures anyway. So let's get out of this room into the hallway. And I want to like turn on as many lights as possible because again, lighting is key. You want it even. Let's go with a couch cushion next. And just like that could be good. And I'm going like kind of zoomed out because I want these like small details basically, as opposed to super close up. Like the texture gets a little bit bigger, which, you know, we can change things up and try one of those as well. How about this pink chair over here? Some interesting wavy fabric texture. All right, moving right along. Goodbye living room. Well, let's go into the bathroom. So we got this shower tile that's kind of interesting. So I'm gonna take a sort of zoomed out photo of one of the tiles. We can do something in the kitchen probably. Maybe this fridge door. I mean, the lighting's not great here, but this is like an interesting reflective surface that could be fun to work with. And we'll go back in. So that's a great start for now. Let's take this all into Photoshop and start messing with these photos. By the way, normally I'll do this by like taking a walk outside and you can just find so many more different textures that way than you can around the house. But I wanted to show that really textures can come from anywhere. You can be as limited as only looking around your own home and still find plenty of different surfaces that are worth taking pictures of. Back where we belong in Photoshop, I've dragged in all of these textures. I've already saved you the time of watching me rename them and labeling them. We got our office chair texture, we've got couch 1, couch 2 is just like a more zoomed in picture we took. We got the red chair from the living room, bathroom tile, fridge, and at the end we're gonna show everything on this example poster, seeing how the different textures can be applied. So let's start with our office chair. First thing I noticed right away is the edges aren't totally clean. You have like a little bit peeking in that right corner, and I guess also the bottom right as well. So let's just zoom in this whole thing. I'm going to duplicate this layer, Command J, and then Command T to transform, and then I'm just going to size the whole thing up a little bit. By the way, you can do all of this photo editing in Lightroom. Like if you go out and take a bunch of pictures and have a lot of editing to do real quick, Lightroom is the best option for that. I'm just showing you in Photoshop because we don't have that many different textures we're working with, so it's pretty easy to flip back and forth through these documents. But basically to start, I'm going to throw a gradient map over this whole texture. And we want all of these textures to be black and white. That's just gonna allow the most versatility with using different blend modes and blending it into the different designs that you'll be using these textures for. So with all these textures, I'm gonna make them either mostly white with black details or mostly black with white details. For this one, and we can kind of just alternate, it doesn't matter so much because you can always invert the image and adjust it to whatever the design is. But for this one, let's open the gradient editor. Let's stick with this mostly white theme. And I'm just gonna bring in the white slider. And what this will do is when we set the blend mode to multiply, you'll just be getting these darker details that are going over the design. So I like it about there. I'm gonna save this file. Let's move on to couch 1. Same thing. Gradient map. These edges look pretty good. So this gradient map, black and white, made everything very gray. So again, let's pick a direction, either mostly black or mostly white. We don't really want gray. That's a little bit more limiting when it comes to design textures. But let's bring up the white again. Just moving these sliders around until we're still getting like some detail, but it's not overblown really. This bottom left corner is interesting. We can always see, you can always adjust the texture, like if you only want the design fitting in this part of the texture. It's not like you have to use the whole thing all the time. But one thing to keep in mind is keep your photos as high resolution as possible. So like always export your textures in as many pixels as you have them in. This is good for our couch. Let's move on to the second one we did of our couch. Again, gradient map. Gonna do gradient map for all these, so get used to it. We can see the edge right there is not ideal, so I'm going to Again, duplicate like we did with the first image, and then blow it up a little bit, just so we have a nice even texture to work with. And this one, we can switch it up. We can go all, or mostly black with white detail. But again, we're gonna want to invert this depending on what the design is that we're overlaying it for. So that looks good for couch 2. And moving on to our red chair, again, familiar, gradient map. This one we can also go mostly dark with white detail. And we can always play with this middle slider too to make it more or less subtle. We kind of want to maximize the detail that you have in this initial export of the texture, because that'll just give you more to work with whenever you're using it. So let's go with that for our red chair. Bathroom tile, I don't really want the ceiling, I don't know what it's called, sealant, whatever. I'm gonna size this up basically so we just get the tile pattern, not any of the edges where it was connected to the other tiles. And this one, again, gradient map. So let's go with our dark again. And this one, we're gonna need a little bit more contrast. So moving both these sliders inward will get you that effect. Let's keep things subtle, probably about there. Also, I see that corner didn't cooperate, so let's continue adjusting the size. All right, that looks pretty good. Moving on to the fridge. We found this like reflective texture in the metal of the fridge. And yeah, this one we can go mostly white with some black reflection details. That is pretty good. And if you want this line darker, you could always bring in this black slider further. Really just depends on what you want to do with the texture. And you can always revise these textures if you didn't like how you initially exported it. Go back in, put a different gradient map on it, and you can mess with how it looks. So that's our fridge. Again, red chair, just making sure all these are saved. Couch 2, couch 1, office chair. Okay, let's get to our example poster. Let's start throwing these textures on top. Open up our Finder, and we'll start with our office chair, because that was our first texture. So this one's gonna work really well because this is obviously a mostly gray white design, and that is also how we have this texture formatted. So I'm gonna switch this blend mode to multiply, and you'll see it gets rid of all the white part of this texture, allowing it to show through to the bottom layer. And then I'm just reducing the opacity by clicking and dragging on this opacity word. Something like 30% is like a good kind of baseline for any kind of subtle texture adjustment you're making. So you can see it's just adding some more fabric details to this side of the image. I like this a lot for this particular poster design. But let's see what the other textures look like. So I'm gonna disable this one. Let's go to couch 1. And again, this is properly formatted for a lighter graphic. And I'm gonna shift this one to multiply as well. So this one's kind of cool. I mean, you obviously get more detail in the darker area on the left side. This is a nice look. Let's go to our more zoomed in couch photo. So you'll get a slightly different feel for this texture. So with this, I mean, if it's mostly black with white detail, you really want to switch the blend mode to screen instead of multiply. Multiply is obviously too dark because there's a lot of black in it. Screen, like this would show up better if this whole image was more colored, but you can see on the colored parts of the design that fabric texture is showing through. So maybe you wanted something subtle like that, but in my mind, if you inverted this and switched it to multiply, that would give you a better feel, more like what we saw with our first two texture examples. So this one's a little bit more aggressive, so I have the opacity a little further down, but that is also an effective texture. Let's look at our red chair next. We've got our red chair texture. It's no longer red. And this one, I'm just sizing up. Again, let's invert this. So we have a white texture with black details to fit the design. Multiply, bring it down. You know, all these fabrics are kind of giving it a similar look, but there's subtle nuances with each. Moving on to our bathroom tile. This one will give it a little bit different of a feel because it's not a fabric, And like the others, I'm gonna go to multiply and then invert this. Again, Command I is the shortcut to invert. You can also go up to image, adjustments, invert. So it doesn't matter so much in that previous process, like I was talking about with the gradient map, going mostly black with white or mostly white with black. But this is kind of a cool, like, marbly look to the whole design. I don't mind that at all. It's a different vibe than the fabric for sure. Let's go on to our fridge, final texture. This one I'm not sure how it'll show up with this particular poster design. But, you know, it's kind of interesting. It just gives it a little bit of, maybe a little bit of depth, just some more intrigue on the left there. So that's kind of a cool vibe it has going. I'm curious if we switch it to the dark version and switch this to screen. That's also kind of interesting. It kind of lightens up the whole thing, but not too aggressively. Play with your textures, play with different blend modes. Lots of cool stuff you can create, and it gets a lot cooler when you can use your own photos as textures.